Good morning. It's February 7th, 2022 at approximately 10:04 a.m. I've been requested to do more of these, even though I'm on the fly. My life's in chaos, and I really don't have anything prepared. I don't get paid for this, and I just really am recording these messages to try to penetrate this insane world of noise, to penetrate some truths, the truth, the only truth that really undergirds everything everyone is asking questions about, but nobody has the answers because we have the answers. And so, um, you know, really kind of a temperature check of this morning's, podcasts and things that are flying around both in mainstream media and, the internet and so on and so forth, is there's still a lot of energy, a lot. It's been only like 48 hours since a lot of this went down, but regarding Joe Rogan, because it started off with the cancel culture because Joe Rogan was presumably entertaining maybe reckless information on behalf of scientists and doctors that are in the know but maybe aren't in the know, that are spreading misinformation as it revolves around COVID, and then of course mainstream media totally ambushing Joe Rogan on a number of fronts, and everybody responding that into the echo chamber. And my theory on that is really kind of the nature of how media works currently. I mean, we all know that algorithms are king. We know that technology and information is the new oil. It's the commodity that rules everything. And so there's just amazing noise on whatever subject actually is in the zeitgeist. And if you really take a step back, and I've listened to Joe Rogan for years, I don't listen to him religiously. I listen to Russell Brand religiously. And by contrast, I find a lot of utility in a lot of the guests that Russell Brand has on his podcast, particularly Under the Skin, and really thoughtful dialogue about big picture items. And because I mentioned to you I'm not getting paid for this, I'm not proclaiming this as a journalism platform. If anything, maybe this is kind of a on-the-fly op-ed to try to penetrate really all the noise out there, because I've spent the last decade, I talk about 13 years of my life being able to get the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that's created the world we live in, which is true. But my journey started on September 15th, 2008, when the Lehman Brothers collapse happened that triggered a global meltdown that led to ultimately what would become the housing crisis, which is more of a derivatives crisis on top of a housing crisis because the way that the financial situation works. And I was listening just a moment ago to Russell Brand on his podcast Luminary with a guest that they had mentioned some really fascinating things by way of the commodification of information, and then ultimately how that technology plays in and how everybody's trying to control the narrative and who has the control. Because many of us, and this legion's been growing for many, many times, and when I say us, I'm not including myself in what I'm about to say, but the likes of Trump supporters. Trump came out in 2016, and I guess it was kind of the first, grenade to this situation where he's like, fake media. Well, the mainstream media, yes, has been covering up and lying about the largest criminal grift and cover-up in history since the 2008 great financial crisis. And, we've got this 24-hour echo chamber. We've been dealing with this for 20 years. Just think back to 9/11, for example, and really everything that took place in the aftermath of 9/11. But just think of really, and I'm smiling just because of how ridiculous it is. At the beginning, people were treating 9/11 as it might have been a natural disaster. And then the second plane flew into the second tower, and then suddenly people are like, whoa, this might be a terrorist act. Meanwhile, Osama bin Laden was all over mainstream media for like 3 or 4 years in advance saying there's going to be a spectacular attack on the United States. And it was crystal clear, that, there was a connection there. And most of the punditry at that time was like, whoa, I wonder, somebody got off track, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of an indication of what took place in the maelstrom after the fact. The media and the echo chamber and the chorus treated 9/11 like it was a natural disaster. All of the family pictures and the suffering and the tragedy and all of the people and going through their grief became the news, as opposed to who knew what, when, and how, and who could have prevented this, and who actually did it, and then ultimately what are we going to do to resolve it? We never did any of that, and as a result, look, man. However this whole went down behind the scenes, I've got my ideas of that, and I'm just using this as kind of kind of a marker in terms of how I'm trying to couch this whole thing. But look, we're still addicted to fossil fuel, okay? Saudi Arabia is still the swing producer. It appears to me that Saudi Arabia was deeply, deeply involved with Al-Qaeda, or at least bin Laden, on many fundamental levels, particularly in providing material support, which actually came out in the 9/11 Commission report. There was a redacted 26 pages that hid that for years and years and years, because the Bush administration only spent $4 million on something that should have probably been literally hundreds of millions of dollars to basically stop what became the next 20 years, which was just nonstop wars and corruption in places like Afghanistan, among others, but mostly Afghanistan when I'm thinking about the intense corruption. But it basically placated and maintained the system. I remember 3 years ago when Saudi Aramco went public, and every major Wall Street firm was, of course, on the offering. I mean, we're talking about Chase, we're talking about Goldman, we're talking about, of course, BlackRock is involved because of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. But the picture that I'm trying to paint in 2 minutes, without actually thinking about this, without being a suit, without being, a legitimate news organization, I'm just trying to make some ties here for everybody to understand the moment that we're in, right? The situation never resolved itself. It just dissipated. Everybody got on with their lives, but the power structure maintained complete control. Are we any closer, outside of potentially electric cars, to a renewable energy revolution? As far as I know, most Western Europe right now is under the thumb of what could potentially take place between Russia and the Ukraine, primarily because of natural gas and the monopoly that Russia and Putin wants to maintain, and potentially get back power to what Putin has talked about for the last 20 years was the biggest mistake they ever made, was to allow the Soviet Union to be disbanded. I mean, that's part of this too. But what's the center point there? Natural resources. I mean, this is what mankind has been battling over for centuries. That's usually the causation of most wars. And it's all back to the centrifugal force of power. Who's got it, who doesn't, for what ends, and what purpose. I maintain, and I proclaim every day, it's Groundhog Day. I don't know why 2022 is literally any different than 2001. It's not. It's just another variation of a bunch of hysteria with just more information and more control through technology of people wondering how this system works. Who's in control for what purpose and why? Many people continue to ask or say, yeah, the system's rigged. We know it's corrupt. But they don't know how. They don't know who did what, when, and how. They don't know who covered it up and why. And then you get these camps. And right now, the playing field is, let's stick with the Joe Rogan experience for the moment. It started with misinformation, right, because of what's going on with COVID. So that mainstream supposedly has the upper hand, and they have some sort of credibility. Meanwhile, we know that Rachel Maddow and also Tucker Carlson were both recently involved with lawsuits in which they were basically, their attorneys from those particular companies claimed, and probably appropriately so within the legal framework, but in terms of media, in terms of how all of this misinformation actually gets channeled, they're thought of legally as entertainment platforms. So they're not a journalistic platform under the thumb of the accountability of getting the right sources and getting this and that. I mean, look, do you need news? Of course you need news. When I watch CNN and they've got cameras on a big war, do I stay tuned in for the first 10 minutes of whatever bombs being dropped to see what's going on? Yeah. Do I know behind the scenes they're not giving us the whole story? You bet your ass I do. In this case of like Don Lemon and Anderson Cooper and whomever and the ivermectin and all this nonsense, that's all it is to me, is nonsense, because Anthony Fauci is some sort of like polarizing figure because of why? Well, I guess there's a whole platitude of things that might, in your head conjecture that. But the bottom line is this story with COVID and whatever we started with before it became about the N-word and, Joe Rogan and him using that has become the catalyst for Spotify just immediately yanking 70 episodes of Joe Rogan. Now imagine, for example, if they just, deleted 70 episodes of Rachel Maddow talking about Trump. What kind of hysteria would there be? What about if they deleted 70 episodes of Tucker Carlson talking about, I don't know, Biden or whomever? I mean, this is like a downward spiral, and it could be a slippery slope to madness, but, can it get any more maddening than it already is in this Orwellian, insane state that we're in? Probably not. Why am I ranting? Why am I taking any time and space of my day when my life's chaos, where I should probably focus on everything that I need to do to try to convince you that I'm somebody worth listening to in the context of all of this madness that's happening out there. Well, Russell Brand and Joe Rogan and Kyle Kulinski and Crystal Ball and Sagar and The Hill and everybody else online justifiably are asking questions about corruption. Who has power? How does this all lead? And everything else. And if you start to follow the money and you unwind who has the power and for what purpose, all roads lead to the Federal Reserve, period. They've been providing 0% interest, low interest loans, and also through quantitative easing, buying back bonds. So they're both the supply and the demand. And all of these bonds, if you watch the con, you will understand are toxic assets. At the end of 2009, after the entire global calamity, because of bets on top of bets and derivatives markets and all these complex financial situations, they were all built on a house of cards. And that's why, guys that I talked to in the con, for example, William Cohen, when writing an epic book on Bear Stearns and what actually was the tipping point, called it House of Cards. So when Bear Stearns went down in 2007 for, basically selling crap, that was the first indication of what was going to happen next. And all of Wall Street positioned around this because they were all shorting, they're all doing the stuff that they're doing now. And the entire global economy came to a screeching halt, meaning liquidity in the system, because Wall Street overplayed its hand in this incredible muckety-muck that is completely on display clearly in the con, one step at a time, and the facts matter above all else, which I'm trying to tell you, that ultimately led to the Federal Reserve, in an emergency scenario, doing something that they've never done before, which is under the Federal Reserve Act, Section 13.3. Section 13.3. Remember that. That gave the Federal Reserve the emergency powers because we had a systemic meltdown to be able to provide emergency lending to the tune of $29 trillion. That's been audited. It's been put out there by the Levy Institute. I talked to Randall Wray, who was one of the lead guys on that. We've got that evidence. And beyond all of that, again, you got to understand how much a trillion is. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion. And 29 trillion went to a criminal syndicate that we then did not use the Department of Justice and the FBI and all of these incredible institutions that are tasked and paid $75 billion a year to hold to account. We did not do the investigations. We let these guys get away with it, and they doubled down. In 2019, there was another run in the markets very similar to what happened in 2008, also based on repo, which I'm still trying to sort out, so I don't want to kind of misspeak at the moment, but I do know the amount of money the Federal Reserve leaned into the big financial institutions to create the liquidity because, again, they were creating a global run to the tune of $11.9 trillion. Now, be aware of this. We had, after the great financial crisis, the Obama administration and the Democrats created what was known as Dodd-Frank, very complicated legislation that was to prevent the likes of liar loans and subprime and all of those things that supposedly created the problem. None of the public understood what it was because it was like 1,200 pages. The press never actually read it. They never detailed exactly what went down and what it all meant. But the relevance of Dodd-Frank at this moment was that it actually created laws so that the Federal Reserve isn't supposed to loan to the institutions that are involved with this sort of behavior. They're actually illegal. And from what I've understood, 40% of the loans that the Federal Reserve created in 2009 are illegal. I don't know what the details are. I just heard that from the top people. I have every intent to go into under the hood and try to sort out what that is, to try to frame that at the right time. But we're stuck. We're all stuck. We're completely stuck. My production is stuck because there's not an audience out there who wants to know the truth. The audience wants to get involved with he said, she said, inward hysteria on a daily basis that the algorithms feed that then takes us further and further away from the center, which is the power, which Russell Brand and Joe Rogan are supposedly going after. But meanwhile, what you need to be aware of, my friends, is that I have been trying to reach desperately Russell Brand, who I love and respect immensely, Joe Rogan, who I really enjoy most of the time. I've got a couple of, like most of us do. Yeah, it's kind of some of the people he talks to wouldn't really want to go there, but whatever. That's our choice to listen to it. That's freedom of speech at this point, and he's got a platform that's not a journalistic platform. And it's not a journalistic platform any more than MSNBC, ABC, CBS, and whatever, who are covering for the people that allowed the largest criminal engineered theft and getaway in history to happen, of which both parties are involved with. Obama was the guy that let him get away with it, and I say that laughing, but it's not. I'm not laughing. It's absolutely the biggest betrayal I could ever possibly imagine and I was a huge supporter of Obama. But then I got underneath the hood. I understood exactly what went down. This isn't fucking Alex Jones talking, pardon my language. This is a guy who spent, at least on the con, 6 consecutive years working with the best people in the country who knew the truth, where we got the evidence, where we actually did the work that the New York Times, the FBI, the DOJ, and Chicago Tribune, all of the entities that we expect to get the truth, never delivered it. And what's that mean ultimately? And I want to finish with this because nobody wants to hear anybody talk for more than 10 minutes, I guess. So I'm going to finish with this. Millions of people got buried in the courts based on illegal foreclosures because the paperwork was such a disaster. The stuff that was happening in the Registry of Deeds was insanity. I went to Sussex, Massachusetts, and North Carolina, got evidence of over 70,000 pieces of documentation fraud that were enabled, that would have saved however many people's houses. I mean, we had the national mortgage settlement back in 2015, I believe, where it was $25 billion, where everybody in the America thought that, okay, we settled this. What should have happened? People should have had their houses modified under the value of their houses to rewrite whatever those mortgages should have been underneath the umbrella of the $29 trillion that we gave to the financial system that railroaded everybody in the beginning, literally set everybody up. And again, the people that got into these loans, not all of them, in fact, a small percentage of them were people who didn't have the right jobs and the right criteria and everything else. A vast majority of them were people who actually owned their houses and got grifted into loans because they didn't have any other income at the time, and they used their houses, like they've said, as an ATM. But that's inappropriate. They were set up that their house was worth X amount of value that they could borrow against, that could then allow them to have the opportunity to deal, if they were elderly, with the increased costs of medications, or they had to get their houses fixed. And a lot of the times what I'm referring to now at this moment are people that are, basically below the line, people that we might say that are living in poverty, but they had equity in their houses and they could refinance. But it was a grift that they didn't understand. Who could understand that anybody in their right mind would think that it was possible that every financial institution from the top down was creating a Gresham's dynamic to create a perverted situation to basically lie, steal, and deceit to get suckers into deals that they could never afford to pay back, because nobody knew that there was $70 trillion funneling this thing and all the bankers were getting fees on this. And then when they blew up the world, and I'm not just talking about the people who got in the houses, it was the pensioners, it was pipe fitters, it was steel workers. I've talked to these people. I talked to a guy out of Cleveland, Ohio. This guy is salt of the earth. His hands were so thick with arthritis, where he was on the job as an iron worker and, building buildings all around the Midwest for decades. And he was a union guy, and he's just as thick. I mean, this guy was a beautiful human being, and just all, America, rock and roll and all the stuff back from the 70s onward. And they stole his pension. They set him up. So when he's in retirement, after all that hard work, all that commitment, all red, white, and blue, and America's the greatest country in the world with his gun rack and everything else, that guy got taken advantage of by this system that can loot everybody. I'm telling you, people, whether it's Joe Rogan, whether it's Russell Brand, those guys are ignoring the truth that I'm giving to them now. They're up in arms about all of this different hysteria that's going on. Is Joe going to get canceled? Is it free speech and everything else? But they're ignoring everything that I'm putting in front of them. Like yesterday, I sent an email to a guy by the name of Matt Stoggs, who is the gatekeeper for Joe Rogan. I've talked to him many times in the past. Matt says, look, man, I put your stuff in front of Joe. Joe's not interested. Joe's not interested so far, and I'm not faulting Joe for this. I can't imagine what it's like to be Joe with literally 30, 40, 50 million people talking about this guy every day. Who knows how you could sort anything out? I'm a needle in a haystack, but I'm a guy with a needle in a haystack with the $29 trillion truth. And how does that play into what Joe Rogan needs to understand right now? Well, he's getting freaking nailed. The 70 episodes of Spotify got deleted because he said the N-word. Now, I don't think he said the N-word, and I haven't seen all 70 episodes. A lot of people say the N-word, get rappers and Snoop Dogg and everybody for years I've listened to say the N-word. I teach my son not to say the N-word. He says the N-word in the context of being a white guy listening to rap music. So it's like, what? I tell him, don't say, I never say the N-word because I actually care about people and their dignity and justice and everything else. And black, white, Jew, Gentile, whatever the case, we're all a melting pot, and, we should have equality and fairness for all, which we don't. We have a corrupt system. And so when Joe Rogan is like on his heels talking about the N-word, while that's a diversion, I think, I'm not sure if it's a diversion, but it's certainly a way to get his attention because of the lawsuits and everything else, enough to get Spotify to pull 70 episodes away from, just drop it. which is huge. Again, like I said, imagine if that happened at CNN, MSNBC, and everybody else. That would be like, are you kidding me? And ultimately, what I'm trying to say to Joe, and I'm trying to say to Matt Stocks, is like, listen, there was 60% of an African American household wealth that was ripped from them in the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. We show that completely with the targeting of Miss Addie Polk, a 91-year-old a wonderful human being that had incredible dignity, that went to church every week for 40 years. Her husband was a hardworking guy, worked in the factories. They owned their house. She got set up on this, and her end was she had to stick a gun to her chest and kill herself because they were taking her house. Imagine, you're 91 years old. You don't have anybody to help you. The only thing you have is your house that you own, and then they're coming to take it from you. Now, it's a little bit complex in terms of, we do know that she got a loan, but then there was like a series of loans that took place that we think are straw buying. But nevertheless, she was targeted. She was targeted in this predation that basically these villains, these hyenas, these brokers would go to City Hall. They would find out who actually had equity in their home, and they also would find out who had to get their roofs fixed, because at that time the cities and the counties were actually fining people in these neighborhoods for blight if they didn't get their house fixed. So they didn't have the extra income, and if they didn't have the extra income to be able to pay those big fines, they were in trouble, especially if they had to, of course, get medications and all of the other cost of living that had been increasing ever since they got on a fixed income. And so then these brokers would show up at their house and say, look, you own your house. This is how much it's worth. They would literally appraise this house for like 3 times the value. They would get these people short-term loans or loans that they would end up refinancing, and it would be manna from heaven. And the people that were, baked into this thing, they're like, oh my God, this is the answer to my dreams. Thank God. Because society stagnated because we had 40 years of neoliberalism that got rid of the golden goose and replaced it with financialization, which has led to this absolute criminal grift. And that's what I'm telling you, because when these guys went to target her, first of all, that's intent, okay? Because they knew what the backstory was. They might not have known they were getting $70 trillion funded by global investors because they thought the housing market was safe and pensioners all around the world. They were just doing their small part of it, but they tended to get these people in the worst loans that they could. So, they hyperinflated the assets. They got huge high yield spread premiums because the brokers got paid more money on that, and they got them in these loans that eventually led to something like Addie Polk's death. An African-American woman, and literally 60% of African-American household wealth by 2012 had evaporated because of the great 2008 financial crisis, which targeted African Americans first, and then it got everybody else. Look, this is what happens when you don't have a society that is in harmony, that is built in a way that you produce more than you consume. So we've created this globalism because the middle guys are taking fees on, exploiting Asian labor or cheap fossil fuels in the Middle East and Asian labor and that sort of thing. And that's the world we've created. It's coming to an end. This is 4 decades. And all of this other stuff that we're talking about is really what's, it's the undercurrent. It undergirds everything. And I got to finish with this. Look, Joe Rogan, please understand that if you are not a racist, and I don't think you are, but a lot of people do, and they're going to take you down for that, I guess. Maybe that's the thing, maybe it's not. But if you are indeed not a racist, look at our work. Our work proves that millions of African Americans were targeted to steal their accumulated wealth, that they finally got a piece of the American dream after decades and decades, or centuries of slavery and decades of Jim Crow. So prove it, Joe. Prove it. Come talk to Patrick Lovell. I've got all the answers that you're looking for. And Russell, please quit talking about Joe and what they're coming down on cancel culture while your gatekeepers are canceling what I've got, which I know you're looking for. If you just stop for 5 minutes and just started looking at what we've got, your whole mind would be blown. It's your entire paradigm. It's not a paradox. It's freaking not rocket science. It's the easiest thing in the world is A plus B equals C. I swear to God. But you have to have investigations, get this stuff to prove it. And it didn't. And I swear to God, all of the other people that are out there in the netherworld still battling with your houses in the corrupt courts, and nobody's listening to you, and media is not talking. Elevate the con, man. It proves that there was nothing but this huge documentation fraud on the front end that leads to what? Huge documentation fraud on the back end that the courts allowed because the courts can't keep up. This crime syndicate is so huge with so many complicit actors that it's overwhelmed our system's ability to rein it in. Mostly because we don't have the critical mass. We don't have the critical mass to demand our elected politicians, and I'm talking to you, Bernie Sanders, and I'm talking to you, Elizabeth Warren, that know this stuff inside and out, but you failed us. You did not go all the way. You played the game on the terms of the corrupt. You call it corrupt. You're talking about, I call it, platitudes, but you're not details. When Bernie Sanders talked about Wall Street's business model as fraud in 2016 during the Hillary Clinton debate, nobody asked a follow-up question, and Bernie didn't come with the facts. It just went off in the ether, and the next thing you know, he's talking about universal health care. He's talking about all of these different things that weren't corruption. We have to purge corruption if we're going to get control of the United States, because it once did kind of function, I guess, under the integrity of law. It doesn't anymore. And we don't have separation of powers, guys. The Congress, the judiciary, and of course the executive branch, they're all under the thumb of the financial system that's at the apex of this stuff. And then, of course, you've got fossil fuel technology and then agriculture and military industrial complex. They're all playing the same game at everybody else's expense. And the reason why they're able to do it and get away with it is because citizens are not acting as citizens. You're behaving as chattel. You're acting as if nobody can actually figure this out. Nobody can actually do anything about it. So I'm going to get mine. I'm going to live every single day, trying to get mine in any way I can, because that's what I have to do to survive. I'm not saying that you're wrong for doing that. I'm just begging you, open your freaking mind to the facts so you're not talking out of the side of your mouth and you're not informed. I'm giving you the facts that all of mainstream media has completely betrayed. And then, of course, now they're going after Joe Rogan because they're saying he's the guy that is providing misinformation. I'm sorry. Rachel Maddow, every day when she talks about Trump and documentation fraud, both in the election certification as well as Giuliani's involvement, not to mention the control fraud that he's involved with because of all of the accounting tricks that his firm does in real estate, which is part and parcel of this whole thing. All of that is true. He's one guy. And he's a mid-level player. The stuff that I'm trying to tell you is the same stuff, but that impacted tens of millions of people. Why are they ignoring the truth? Why is Joe Rogan ignoring the truth? Why is Russell Brand ignoring the truth? Why aren't they talking to me? Because somebody didn't hand me on a silver platter, those guys, and I have 50 million followers? I don't know what it's going to take. Again, I am not paid to do this. Right now, my life is in disarray, and I'm sure we'll find a pathway forward eventually. I don't know at what cost. But guys, if we don't understand the facts, if we don't come together, if you're fighting in the courts right now and you're not trying to get the facts to everybody that needs to see it, you're not going to win in the courts. We haven't for years. And Joe Rogan and Russell Brand, if you want the truth about how power and grift works without talking to us, you're ignoring it and you're canceling it. And that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous for whatever high school antics your gatekeepers are involved with. And it's unfortunate. But I'll keep on keeping on and I'll keep trying. And please, hopefully, I'll spark everybody to get hip to this. I'm telling you, everybody who has seen The Con, everyone who has seen The Con, at www.thecon.tv, which is on Apple TV, which is on Amazon and others, everyone who's seen it is like, are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me? But, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands is not millions. We need millions to say that with the information, because once you are informed, you can't get played. I tell people all the time, is there a difference in knowing that your wife is cheating with the neighbor and all the details and the evidence? Is there a difference in what your decision may be versus if you just speculate or if you have a feeling? How does that change the telemetry? I'm sure there's many of us who would stay in the relationship because that's just what many of us do for whatever reason. But I know that many of us would be like, well, if I've got the evidence, then I got to leave, or I got to change something, or I got to do something. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We've got the evidence that the DOJ, the FBI, the NY Times, everybody ignored, and now Russell Brand and Joe Rogan are ignoring, and whatever. I hope you have a great day. I don't know if it's effective or not. I'll keep trying.